Inside the house, Violet and her grandmother are making Valentine cards for Violet's classmates. Violet makes a card for everyone in her class, but isn't sure how many cards she should get in return. To be sure she gets one, her grandmother hands her a present. Inside it is a music box that Violet's grandmother used to listen to when she was a little girl. Now an adult, Violet walks into a college building and soaks up the ambience. It is another Valentine's season, and everyone around her is giddy and in love. In a music theater she meets Professor Carver, who just received some unpleasant news about someone's health. Violet has written some research about the effects of music therapy for improving patient health. Professor Carver says she's expected to do a paper in order for her to graduate from the college, and not the real-time research that she is now submitting. While Violet pleads her case, Professor Carver notices a report about helping a woman regain mobility in her hand using music therapy. Violet confirms that it's true. Professor Carver wants to know if music therapy can also help with regaining speech abilities. Violet acknowledges that there's no reason why it should not work, as music has amazing capabilities to heal. Professor Carver proposes that if Violet succeeds, she can graduate and get recommended for her dream job at the University Hospital Music Therapy Center. If Violet fails, she'll return to take the course again. An excited Violet finds out that the patient is Professor Carver's brother. In her flower shop, Desiree is taking an order for Valentine's Day flowers while also mildly flirting with the client. She's however disappointed when he says that the 24 roses he is ordering are for his girlfriend. Violet walks in with a couple of ribbons in hand to give Desiree. Desiree is thankful, but Violet announces that she's going out of town to Stockbridge for 2 weeks, for school-related work. Desiree expresses concern that Violet will miss her sea-themed Valentine's single party mix, but Violet assures her she'll be there, as she's never missed it in the past. Desiree announces that Donna from design school will be there, as she's recently divorced and needs to mingle. Desiree wonders if Violet will meet an eligible suitor at Stockbridge. Violet scoffs at the thought, but Desiree is of the opinion that Violet will find love soon, as she seems to always take care of others and get very little love herself. Violet is clearly a non-believer in the idea that she needs to put herself out there to find and receive love, as all she wants is to start her dream job and take care of her patients. Violet walks into a hospital building and assists the receptionist, who is hanging up hearts in the spirit of Valentine's Day. She asks to meet her new patient, Charles Carver. While the receptionist attempts to look up the name, a doctor, who simply introduces himself as the doctor in charge of Charles's care, announces that Charles Carver was discharged that morning and is now under home care. Violet introduces herself and says she is the new music therapist that will be taking charge of Charles's case to help him regain his ability to speak. The doctor is clearly doubtful, but Violet makes her case, stating that music therapy has shown the potential to help heal patients. The doctor challenges that traditional medicine is supposed to do that. Violet stands her ground, insisting that music therapy will work where traditional medicine failed. Still highly doubtful, the doctor walks away to attend to a patient. Violet is a little stumped, because the doctor acted like his job is more important than hers. The receptionist referred to the doctor as Dr. Williams, chiming in that he is performing open heart surgery on a patient, and that's pretty important. Violet asks for Charles Carver's home address. The receptionist recommends that she takes a gift along, as Mrs. Carver is hard to impress. Violet walks by a shop showcasing a chocolate fountain, and she looks dreamy-eyed upon seeing it. She walks into the chocolate shop, and the owner introduces himself as Max. He offers her a Valentine-themed chocolate box that he just made, but Violet rather prefers something that isn't romantic, and she wants is someone who is hard to impress. Max then recommends an assortment box of chocolates. Violet states that she knows someone who will need the chocolate fountain displayed, and Max should expect a call from Desiree. While trying to personalize the card to go with the box of chocolates, Max discovers that the recipient is his grandmother, Mary Ann Carver. He immediately changes his product recommendation while Violet introduces herself as the music therapist. Violet is thankful, makes the payment, and with a knowing smile, receives change for $11.11. On her way out, she texts Desiree about the chocolate fountain she found. She arrives at the cover house and is welcomed by Mrs. Carver. Violet comments on the beauty of the house, but is informed that she will be staying in the guest house. She is led to meet Charles Carver. She introduces herself and comments about Charles's appreciation of music and how it'll help the therapy. Mrs. Carver sits in on the session, while Violet tries to get Mr. Carver to sing and hum. When that doesn't work, she asks him to try clapping, and imagining he's playing his favorite instrument. He struggles with all methods. Mrs. Carver, uncomfortable, wants to end the session, but Violet would like to continue, as they only just started. Mrs. Carver asks Violet to step out of the room with her. She expresses her disbelief in the therapy, even though she'd like it to work. Violet thinks they can get results in a few days. Mrs. Carver struggles to explain that it's difficult for her to see him like that, as they were married on Valentine's Day, and it'll be 50 years soon. She'd just like to hear him say the words, "I love you," on their upcoming anniversary. Violet gives her word that he'll be better. Mrs. Carver explains the therapy schedule to Violet as they walk down the stairs. She also explains that her grandson will be overseeing their sessions. Violet wonders if it's Max. Mrs. Carver says it's her other grandson, a doctor. The doctor walks in at that moment, clutching a motorcycle helmet, and Mrs. Carver introduces him as Dr. Blake Williams. They both chorus that they've met, as they don't seem excited about working together. Blake walks into a bar, asks for a beer, and meets Max. He wonders why he'd be drinking chocolate in a bar. He chides Max for not being able to find a date for Valentine's Day, as he spends too much time at his chocolate shop. Max then hands him a box of rose petal-infused truffles. Meanwhile, Violet is at the Carvers' guest house and talks to Desiree on the phone while they watch their favorite reality show. Violet feels like she's put herself under immense pressure by promising results by Valentine's Day, and with Blake looking over her shoulder. At the same time, Blake is not thrilled about Violet's therapy, and is of the opinion that it'll make Mr. Carver's recovery 10 times harder than it already is. Desiree would just like to meet Blake's cute brother, while Max asks Blake to make time out of his busy schedule to help him at the chocolate shop. Blake cannot understand the fuss behind Valentine's Day and the resultant rush, but Max states that Blake feels that way because his heart has been broken too many times. Blake arrives at the house on his motorbike and meets Violet on the driveway. Blake still undermines the effectiveness of her treatment method. They begin the session, while Blake checks Mr. Carver's vital signs. Violet talks about their new location for the session, and how they will be listening to music instead of making music. Blake remains doubtful, and recommends hot tea to help Mr. Carver's congestion. Violet is fascinated by all the records in the room, and she finds one by Mr. Carver. Blake explains that Mr. Carver was quite popular, and would have hit it big if the record label didn't go under. However, he went into the musical instrument business and was successful. Violet puts the record on, and Mr. Carver is clearly nostalgic while he listens. It makes Blake quite curious to see that reaction. Violet and Blake walk out of the house to Blake's motorcycle, and Violet comments about how the bike doesn't seem like the best idea for someone who works in a hospital. She casually says she's not looking forward to seeing him at their next session. Blake and Charles are at the hospital when Violet shows up with a guitar. Blake had moved Mr. Carver's physical therapy time to the same time as her session with him, so she thought to come keep him company with music. Blake insists that the session is for doctor and patient only, and takes Mr. Carver inside, leaving Violet rather stumped. Violet is a little surprised to meet Blake at the front door of the Carver house with flowers and chocolate. Mrs. Carver opens the door and happily accepts the bouquet and chocolates. Blake recommends white chocolate if Violet wants to win her over. In front of a music shop, Violet is looking through records in order to buy some. Blake comes to meet her there, wanting to vet her choices, but also invites her to dinner on Mrs. Carver's instruction. She cannot believe him, because he doesn't seem to like music. Blake says his grandfather was a jazz musician, so he definitely likes music, but he doesn't believe in it as medicine. They argue about bands and solo artists. Blake picks a solo artist record and leaves, while Violet would like to take a love song compilation. At dinner, Mrs. Carver recounts that she was never the best cook, but Charles was never bothered. She recollects that at their first date, Charles surprised her with his band and performed a song for her. It then becomes revealed that Blake used to be in a band, to Violet's surprise. He blushes while he admits it was a thing, but is now being retired from it. Violet reveals that she grew up around music, mostly from her grandmother, and she feels like her grandmother is watching over her. She goes ahead to propose a toast to Blake's former band. After dinner, Blake says he thinks it's really nice what Violet said about her grandmother. Violet makes jokes about Blake's defunct band. She receives a call from Desiree, who is panicking about being neck-deep in work and needing extra hands. Violet calms her down and says she can be there in 2 hours. Violet is clearly daunted by this, but Blake suggests going on his bike. She's wary at first, but she gets on the bike. They arrive at the flower shop and help Desiree with her rush wedding order. Desiree mentions the reality TV love show that they watch, but Blake immediately voices his disapproval, saying that the reality show is indeed unrealistic. Expecting strangers to meet and know each other for 2 weeks and fall in love in that time, it makes no sense. Sarcastically, Violet says that Blake is a realist that doesn't believe in Valentine's Day or music therapy. Blake doesn't also believe in Cupid. Desiree will not allow any Cupid slander, and asks what's wrong with showing the people we love how we feel about them, with flowers and chocolate. Blake goes to load the truck with the flowers, while Desiree and Violet finish up. Desiree opines that Violet and Blake are a perfect match. Violet disagrees as she insists they can't stand each other, and Desiree simply has a vivid imagination. Blake comes back in and gets an invite to Desiree's Valentine's singles party. Blake and Violet are back at the Carver house. Violet thanks Blake for the ride, as she would likely still be stuck in traffic. Blake acknowledges her, saying he is happy to help a colleague. Her college professor calls to find out if there's any sort of progress, but Violet cannot give a firm answer. She reminds Violet that she has less than a week to get Mr. Carver to speak. She responds in the affirmative, but is a little worried. At the new session with Mr. Carver, Violet sings while playing the piano. Mr. and Mrs. Carver obviously enjoy the song. Violet continues to play while painting a picture for Mr. Carver with his eyes closed, and tries to get him to respond to a question about his first date with his wife, but no words are forthcoming. Mrs. Carver, struggling with watching her husband, suggests a break. Violet glances at the wall clock, and it's 11:11. She comments that her grandmother would sing a song to get things back on track whenever things weren't going as planned. She offers to sing one more song. The Carvers agree, and Violet begins to sing the song that his band sang to Mrs. Carver on their first date. With clear nostalgia, Mr. Carver rocks his head back and forth, and suddenly hums out the next few notes. They are all pleasantly surprised, including Mr. Carver himself. Blake is stacking wood, and admits that Violet sings very well, but he's unimpressed by the results. Violet is similarly unimpressed by his attitude, and calls him a pessimist. He retorts that it's better than blind optimism. She picks up a piece of wood and gets a splinter in her finger. She stubbornly won't let Blake touch it, but Blake insists, and helps her get it out. Out for coffee, Violet chides Blake for taking his black, calling it pessimistic, just like him. Blake makes fun of her whipped cream cup of coffee that stays on her face every time she takes a sip. Jimmy from Charles Carver's former band passes by and mentions that he and the rest of the band would like to come by to see Charles, but they're a little terrified of Mary Ann. Violet suggests they bring a box of white chocolate. After Jimmy head off, Violet wonders why Blake left his band. Blake responds saying his patients need him more. Violet wishes she could do more for Charles Carver. Blake asks her not to be so hard on herself, as his grandfather has clearly been happier since she came around, so that counts for something. He asks for her help at Max's chocolate shop, and she's happy to help, since Blake helped Desiree at her flower shop. Another bit of whipped cream stays on Violet's nose, and Blake helps wipe it off. Proceeding to Max's chocolate shop, a frenzied Max is more than happy to have them around. Blake clearly knows his way around, as he helps Max every Valentine's Day. While they work, Blake reveals that he became a doctor because his parents lost their lives in a car accident when he was 11. He just wanted to be able to help people change the outcome, so that they don't experience the same pain he did. Violet reveals that she became a music therapist because she promised her grandma she would use her voice to heal people, and her last relationship ended because her boyfriend moved away, and didn't ask her to move with him. She decided to focus her energies on her career. Blake reveals that his last relationship ended because his girlfriend cheated on him 1 week before he was going to propose. Max breaks up their moment with instructions on their baking, inviting her to come back next year for more, as she's a natural. Walking home, Violet makes her case regarding musical therapy. She lists songs that can definitely open up emotions and trigger nostalgic memories. Blake also mentions a song that is a tearjerker when he listens to it. Violet is impressed that he now gets it. Blake offers her an activity that will definitely trigger some nostalgic feelings when they arrive at the Carver house. At the Carver house, they sit near a fire and roast marshmallows, while Violet asks when Blake will share his singing voice. Blake is not excited about the idea and declines, but asks what Violet's favorite song is. Violet sings her grandmother's song to Blake. He looks smitten as she sings, and still looks smitten after she leaves. At their next session, Mr. Carver looks lively. Blake is present, and hands Mr. Carver his old saxophone. Mr. Carver plays a tune, to the pleasant glee of Blake, who is just in awe of how far he's come. He's supported on the piano by Violet. Shopping for some items for Valentine's Day, Blake expresses that he's not a believer in Valentine's Day, but his grandparents being married for 50 years counts for something. He can also see it means something to Desiree and Max, but he's never had any reason to celebrate it. Violet says he now has a reason, and says Mr. Carver is that reason. Blake seems a little disappointed by that response, but shakes it off. Violet reveals that she's not the biggest believer in Valentine's Day, but she loved the tradition that she created with her grandma, and the memories surrounding it. They even made a secret sign that whenever she sees 11:11, she knows that her grandma is watching over her. Blake asks why she has a deadline to get Mr. Carver to speak by Valentine's Day. Violet explains that she will have to retake the semester at her college, and her dream job will be gone if that happens. Blake didn't realize she was under so much pressure, and he has a cousin, Charlie, that works at the university hospital that might be able to help. He also playfully admits that he would still have been hard on her, even if he knew she was under pressure. At checkout, Violet has a light bulb moment and suggests that they decorate the Carver's living room, in celebration of their 50th anniversary on Valentine's Day. Blake initially thinks it's a crazy idea, because his grandma doesn't appreciate such, but he agrees that it makes sense and volunteers to help. Back at the Carver house, Violet and Blake set up the decorations and surprise Mr. and Mrs. Carver with it. Mrs. Carver loves it, and gives Blake and Violet warm hugs. An outdoor movie showing in black and white sees Mr. and Mrs. Carver holding hands. Blake suggests he and Violet go get snacks and give his grandparents some space. Mrs. Carver asks for buttered popcorn. As they get the snacks, Violet marvels at how Mr. and Mrs. Carver have been married for 50 years, and how those on the reality show she watches with Desiree don't make it past 6 weeks. She hopes Desiree finds love at her Valentine's single party. Blake wonders why she's going to the party he has to attend because of the chocolate fountain. They talk about love at first sight and poetry form. He says he's coming around to her. She also uses poetry to tell him that she thinks his heart is true. They suddenly realize that they forgot Mrs. Carver's buttered popcorn. Violet gets a knock on the door, and it's Desiree. She comes around because she doesn't want to make cookies by herself. She notices that Violet looks off, and thinks it's because Violet is falling in love with Blake. Violet blatantly refuses the idea that she's falling in love at all. They sneak into the Carver's kitchen to bake cookies quietly, but that fails as they knock things over, and Mrs. Carver walks in on them in the kitchen. The three of them bake cookies together, while Desiree complains about how she might be scaring her soulmate away by talking about flowers and baking. Mrs. Carver does not believe that it's possible to scare your true soulmate away. She also gives Violet some ideas regarding her love life, and tells her to listen to her heart. Violet goes to the hospital with the cookies she baked. The receptionist tries one, absolutely loves it, and insists Blake tries one. He loves it too. Violet asks him to accompany her to the singles mix party, but slightly panics and asks him to accompany her as a colleague instead of as a date. Blake, although slightly disappointed, agrees to go with her as a colleague, though he seems like he'd want more. At the party venue, Desiree is panicking about the chocolate fountain not being there yet. Violet assures her that it's on the way. At the same time, Max and Blake pull up on the driveway. Blake suggests they carpool. In the car, Max wants to listen to music, but Blake doesn't like the song choice. Violet changes the song, and Max belts out the tune, singing along. In no time, Blake is also singing along. On arriving at the party, Desiree introduces Donna to Violet. Violet announces that the fountain has arrived, and Desiree looks smitten upon seeing Max. Max is likewise smitten by Desiree, as he asks Blake who she is. Violet is happy that Max and Desiree seem to have hit it off, but Blake notices a hint of sadness. Violet admits she feels that way because she has one day left with Mr. Carver to help him speak. Blake assures her that his grandparents will be happy regardless, seeing as she has made lots of progress. The pace of the music changes, and Max asks Desiree how she became so incredible. She explains that she helps the local farmers sell their flowers at her shop, and everyone wins. Max thinks she is absolutely amazing. Violet asks Blake if he believes in the concept of soulmates, and he says he does not, especially if they live miles apart. He does not believe in destiny, but he does believe in free will, and that one of the two people need to decide to speak up and do something about how they feel. Violet goes to talk to Desiree and confides in her. She wants to tell Blake how she feels, but is terrified. Desiree assures her that opening up her heart is the right thing to do, and she will be just fine. Violet agrees to do it, and heads back to the chocolate fountain. She does not find Blake, but finds Donna instead. She asks him if she's seen Blake, and Donna points in the direction of where he's standing talking to a blonde woman. Violet is saddened, and she leaves the party. While waiting for the valet to bring her car, Blake sends a text that Violet ignores. She then receives a call from Professor Carver commending her for a job well done. Although his brother hasn't regained his speech, she is happy to see him more cheerful than he has been in a long time. She congratulates Violet, announcing that she will be graduating, and she has the job. Professor Carver tells Violet to take the next day off, as Mrs. Carver can pack up Violet's things for her, and excitedly heads off to go play Scrabble with her brother, Mr. Carver. Violet heads home and notices Max and Desiree arrive. Max offers to head home and says goodnight to Desiree, kissing her hand. Desiree notices that Violet is sad, and Violet explains, crying, that Blake doesn't feel the same. Inside the house, Desiree and Violet are having ice cream. Desiree lovingly jokes to help Violet feel better. They hear a knock on the door, and it's Blake outside. He brought her grandmother's music box because he knows it's important to her. He asks if they can talk. They take a walk, and she admits that she left the party because she saw him talking and putting his arm around a blonde woman's neck. Blake retorts that the blonde woman is Charlotte, also called Charlie, after Mr. Charles Carver. She's the cousin he was going to speak to about her job. Violet feels silly, but refuses to admit that it hurt her to see Blake with another woman, and that she has feelings for Blake. Blake congratulates Violet on her job, and Violet admits that even now that she has the job, she still doubts herself, especially as she wasn't able to help Mr. Carver speak by the deadline. Blake assures her that she did a great job either way. Violet will not accept defeat, and insists on meeting the goal by the deadline. Violet decides to get in touch with Jimmy, Mr. Carver's former bandmate, and Blake offers to help. Max commends Violet for the brilliant idea of organizing the event at the jazz club. However, he announces that Blake can't make it and is stuck at the hospital. Max and Desiree grab a seat, while Violet gets on the stage to start the show. Violet welcomes everyone to the Carvers' 50th anniversary celebration. Desiree yells from the audience for Violet to sing something, and Violet obliges and dedicates the song by her grandma to Mr. and Mrs. Carver. The audience applauds her beautiful rendition, as Blake also shows up during the performance. Violet calls Blake to the stage, and they perform "It Had to Be You" in collaboration with Jimmy. Blake invites her grandfather to the stage to play the saxophone. Mr. Carver plays it beautifully and pauses to sing the words, "I love you." It's a beautiful performance and the crowd bursts out in applause again, while Mr. and Mrs. Carver share a kiss. Violet commends Blake's singing voice. Blake points out to Violet that the time is 11:11 and confesses that he didn't believe in love at first sight or falling in love in 2 weeks. He also strongly believes that the reality show she watches is scripted. Violet proceeds to ask if he has fallen in love with her. He affirms that he has, and they share a kiss.